Hello and welcome to episode 23 of the TRUUMAN Podcast, the podcast designed to create a generation of self-defined men. Today, I'm joined by Jindy Mann. Jindy, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks for having me on. Really looking forward to this.
Amazing, thank you so much, Jindy. I don't know if you've caught any of the previous podcasts, but I love to start the podcast with arguably the hardest question on the planet, and that is, Jindy, in your own words, what makes you a man?
How long have we got? Um, what a brilliant question. It's a question I explore a lot in my work, which I'm sure we'll talk about. And I don't have a good answer to that question. And that's what I love about the question. It is endlessly complex. We could throw out all sorts of different bits of research and perspectives, but I, I'll try and say something because I think some frame can be useful, and one way I think about it is the different lenses through which we can look at the question. And one is biological or neurobiological. You know what might we neurobiologically say relates to the gender of being a man. We can look at it from a kind of social perspective. So, how do we get socialized as men? We can look at it from an ancestral perspective. What did we inherit from our ancestors? And we can even kind of look at it as a archetypal perspective. If take the Jungian psychological view that there are sort of divine or primal aspects of the masculine energy or being a man. And I think all of those in different extents are unknowable, but they all play a role, and we never fully know to what extent they play a role in each individual. So it's a brilliant question, and that's the best answer I've got.
I love it. I jokingly said in the last one that I'm going to snip everyone's pause because every single person I ask just sort of either laughs, smiles, smirks, looks in sheer disbelief, and there's a pause anywhere from 1 second to maybe even 30 seconds in some scenarios of people answering it. I actually did a self podcast where I interviewed myself, and that was one of the episodes. And I asked myself that question, and you can even still see the pause of
Even though you knew it was coming.
which is really funny. But yeah, I do enjoy that question a lot because I think it sets it up to sort of see what this kind of podcast is going to be. So, Jindy, why don't you explain a little bit about what it is that you do in the sort of man space, shall we say? What is it that you do?
What I do overall is probably worth sharing as well. So I'm a leadership coach. I'm an organizational consultant, and my background is in consulting. Spent a couple of decades in that in different sorts of consulting roles. But then the third part of that is the work I do with men and masculinity. So 3 years ago, we started running free groups, free men's circles, and we do those online. And each group comes together, it's a group of strangers, and we host conversations for every week for 8 weeks, all online. And we get guys from all over the world. And we talk about what the groups want to talk about. So we, as far as possible, or as much as possible, encourage the group to talk about or name the things they want to talk about. And usually the same sort of themes come up. So that's kind of, those groups have been running for 3 years. At the start of this year, we started an online community. So we use a private social network. And it's a place where men can keep going to. So often at the end of these groups, guys say, well, kind of, yeah, I'm going to miss this. What next? How can I keep in touch? So we've now got this online community. We do a monthly call. We share content. We just keep in touch with each other and have conversations. And over time, hopefully that will grow and we will offer more things out of there. And that's currently free as well. At some point, we'll ask for contributions just to pay for the platform. I also spend a lot of time researching and writing about masculinity, about gender, about men's mental health. And I also get invited to do things like panels and talks and workshops and those sorts of things as well. So it's continuing to grow and develop and change all the time. And I find the more I learn, the more questions I have.
Yeah, that's a really nice way of ending that, because I completely agree with that statement. It's a minefield that the more you explore it, the more you want to question it, and the more you want to explore it. And yeah, I really like that. That's a nice way of summing that up, which is quite cool. I guess the similar to myself, there must be a story, right? What got you into this space?
Mm. Yeah. This might be a long story, so I'll
Great.
keep it. But is that permission to give a long story? Great.
Yeah.
So I suppose there's some fundamental or moments and periods in my life that brought me to doing this, and it was never something I set out to do. So I grew up in the Midlands. I was born in the Midlands. My parents came from India. They emigrated to the UK back in the early 70s. And I'm the youngest of four. So I grew up in this, what I often describe as a kind of triple patriarchal culture: British, Indian, and the youngest of four. There's a 3-year gap between me and the rest of my siblings. So uh, that was my kind of early experience of growing up, and family is obviously a really formative influence. And then I lost my dad when I was 13. So he died unexpectedly. He had a heart attack. He was 48. And so found myself just entered teenage years, no elder male role model. I've got 2 older brothers, but they were also teenagers. So we were just kind of figuring stuff out. And before I knew it, I was kind of entering into adulthood and didn't really have a sense of what it was to be a man. And this was the 90s, and the 90s was not a healthy time in terms of role models, in terms of pop culture role models for masculinity. It was all about sex and material goods and some things now that we look back on, hopefully, and look really, really outdated. So I was kind of figuring this stuff out, and didn't realize I was figuring this stuff out. I was just feeling a little bit lost. I'd accidentally done 2 business degrees by this point, so I then went into the corporate world and the consulting world that I mentioned earlier, and eventually hit a wall with that at the age of 30. So quite almost had an early career midlife crisis, and I was good at what I did. I was successful, but from the outside, it looked, quite exciting and glamorous and all those things, and it was well paid. But I realized I didn't want to do it anymore. I didn't know what I did want to do. And so I started working with a coach. And I thought I was going to work with her to figure out my next career move. But what I was actually doing was obviously a lot more than that, as is often the case with coaching. So over a period of time, over the next few years, I was kind of really starting to go on a journey of learning more about myself, really, and starting to reconnect with parts of myself that were kind of long buried. And as part of that, I guess what I was doing without realizing it was kind of reintegrating some of my feminine and understanding my masculine better as well. So I've always played football. I've always been in football teams, and I've always worked in these masculine cultures of consulting and corporate worlds and financial services and all sorts of things. Yeah. So I came to there was this kind of realization moment with my coach that I now kind of had this foot in both camps, had this rare position of being someone who knew what the inside of a football dressing room was like, but had this other side emerging quite strongly, and felt that I wanted to do something about it, because what I saw all around me was guys who had some variation of my journey. They were playing some role of man that they felt they had to be. They were wearing a mask. They were wearing a suit of armor. They were struggling. They were suffering. That was playing out on the people around them. It plays out in organizational cultures, and I think it plays out in the wider world. And I saw it in my own friendships as well. And I just thought, we're all kind of struggling and suffering in different ways here, but none of us are really doing anything about it. So I felt called to do something about it.
Amazing. I like the sentence that we're all sort of wearing a mask and pretending to be some sort of form of masculinity. And yeah, I think you're right. You see some interesting people that just sort of feel that they have to keep doing what they're doing. And it's interesting that you said that it was around the age of 30. So I'm just in my 30s now, and it was sort of a similar turning point to myself. And a couple of my previous guests as well seem to have this sort of enlightenment at 30. I guess I'll ask you the question. Why do you think that age sort of is starting to trigger men into these sort of thoughts, that early midlife crisis, so to speak?
It's it's hard to say. I mean, that's in terms of what we might typically consider midlife. That's quite early, that sort of age, and usually it comes a lot later for men. The kind of asking of questions like, what am I really here for? What do I really want to do with my life? What's it all about? Those sorts of difficult questions that can actually be quite anxiety inducing. So I don't know. It could be there's a growing awareness of this in modern society. I think there feels to me, I've got a few years on you. It feels to me that there is a growing awareness that this kind of isn't working. The way we're doing this just isn't working, and there's just a lot of suffering around. A lot of people struggling, not just men. The way we're going about culture and society and our countries is visibly, I think, not quite working. So I wonder whether that questioning is now coming earlier.
Yeah, for me, I think it's more the role model of what it means to be a man is changing, right? Like that definition of masculinity. We've moved away from what was that traditional role and that traditional provider. And now you might be in a semi-serious relationship in your 30s and you're both earning similar incomes or slightly different, but nothing too crazy. And I don't know, do you feel safer in that scenario? Like that's probably one aspect of it as well. And like there's less pressure to stay in a role that doesn't fulfill you, but in a previous generation was more necessity than anything else. So yeah, that I sort of echo what you're saying. I think there's a shift from manly man breadwinner to what is masculinity these days? What does that mean? What does it mean to be a man? And you sum it up quite nicely. I think your LinkedIn header says it. There's 4 billion ways to be a man, which is quite a nice way of putting it. But going back onto what you do, is that something that you've seen? Is it that redefinition, or what else are you sort of seeing in the space?
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, just building on what you were saying and what you'd asked me before, I suppose what we've also seen over the last 50 years, I suppose, is progress in gender equality. So we've seen women making progress in areas that they weren't allowed to before, and we've seen certain structural barriers and things change or be removed altogether. And there's still obviously a lot of work to be done there. But what I think that's inevitably also led to is men questioning their role, as you've said. If I'm not this, then what am I? And then I wonder also just about some almost economic things. Right? So when I was 30, ironically, at the age that I talked about, that turning point, it was also the time that I bought a property, my first property, and I was just able to afford it in London. And I wouldn't be able to now. I absolutely wouldn't be able to. And I think what I see a lot with younger people is that given that option is often off the table for a lot of people of any gender, they're kind of going, well, how is it I'm working this hard, I'm this qualified, I'm this good at what I do, I'm earning this much money, but I can't even buy a property. So they're questioning the whole thing. They're questioning what's going on here, what's this about? So there's a bit of that, I think. And I also think there's turning points and there's pivotal things that happen in your life, but also in the world that invite you to kind of question things. And right now we're just seeing, certainly, we're both in the UK and and therefore live in Europe, we're just seeing endless uncertainty, and that's not going to go away anytime soon. And I think one of the positive things that comes out of all this uncertainty and all this anxiety is a questioning of everything. Like, what's this about? What am I here for? And I guess one of the I talked about the 90s earlier. What I see now in a lot of prominent public figures like sports people or athletes or musicians is then talking about things like mental health or the things they're struggling with, or also just living in a different way, just redefining the idea of what it means to be a man. And I think that is really opening up new ideas in men, which is a really positive development.
Yeah, it is definitely a positive switch. I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan of it. I think I wouldn't tick traditional roles in the sense that I don't think I could fit in what it used to be a man. I feel like maybe I tick a few boxes, like I like going to the gym, I like sport, I'm competitive. Like those are probably your patriarchic sort of states as a man, I guess. But there's other sides to me as well that I don't feel tick any of those boxes whatsoever. And it's nice that you can be a lot more open with it. And yeah, you're right. I think it's questioning that position a little bit more as like, well, feminism has had its day, but what does that actually mean now for those roles? Like we're now equal, so now I get to have a conversation, right? That's the fair way of looking at it. So it's it's an interesting way of wording it. So I just want to sort of revert back a little bit as well because you touched on your sort of childhood and growing up, and I just want to reiterate on that if that's okay. So you mentioned that you lost your father when you were sort of like 13 and sort of that. What do you think that did for you in regards to how you're envisaging yourself as a man now? Because you mentioned bringing in that femininity and that now being something that what you would class as your masculinity. So what was there's obviously a natural shift there, but what else was the influence there?
Yeah, I just think at this point it might be worth me just explaining what I mean by masculinity and femininity, because I think people sometimes get tangled up in the terms. I often find it easy to talk about something like yin and yang as different polarities or energies or parts of our psyche that we all have. So we're all a little bit masculine, a little bit feminine. If we get away from it being the idea of gender, we all have these different sort of life forces going on within us. And what often gets socialized out of boys and young men is some of what we might think of as feminine qualities. And so when I lost my dad, it's in some ways it meant there was no template for what man I was going to become. At 13, he worked 6 days a week. He had shifts in a factory, so I didn't see him that much, but we were close. So I have this idea of who he was. So ever since then, I'm still kind of piecing together who he was as a person and making sense of that. But it also meant there was kind of a blank slate. So I have some sense of who he was and some of his qualities. And some of his qualities, he was a big guy. He was a factory worker, barrel-chested, beard, all those sorts of things. But he also was a very gentle, tender guy at times as well. He could be an angry guy. He could be an aggressive guy as well. So there were all these different sides to him. And I think... I think for each of us, it's figuring out what's underneath. Once we get past what we've been told we should be as men, what's actually underneath? Who are we really? What's our innate spirit, our innate soul, our innate personality, whatever you want to call it? And that was my journey, and still is.
Yeah, great. And I think one you touched again. You touched on like turning points and people awakening and questioning. I think a lot of people I speak to seem to have had similar visions or had these conversations with themselves during COVID. I mean, it's a time time that's passed now, but it was some people were in a really fortunate position that they were able to almost self-reflect on careers and visions for the future, and I guess that lack of support network because you were sort of given what you were given in those scenarios, depending on where you lived and who was in your bubble type thing. So, yeah, I think there's definitely a lot more turning points that are happening quickly and more regularly. So people are thinking about these things, like you say, whether it's economic or whether it was pandemic related, they seem to be happening quite frequently. We've had two big ones in a 6-year period, which, yeah, is interesting. Interesting times to be alive. Let's say to keep it vague. What is your sort of thought process on that side of things? Is there we've talked a little bit about um, these pivotal changes, but maybe a little bit more in depth, like how you see people either A, coming together, or B, starting these conversations and actually starting to have them themselves. Because I think the people that listen to this are maybe they just want to find some common ground with people and see what their thoughts are and whether they're almost allowed to have these thoughts. So how would you suggest that you start to have these thoughts with yourself?
It's a great question, because one of the things we hear often in the groups and conversations we have with men is that it's easier to talk to a group of strangers than it is your mates often. And I think there's a number of reasons for that. So I guess to come to your question directly is to find a way to start to explore whatever questions you feel you're holding in a way that feels safe, easy, doable for you. You know, that first step. For some people, that's they can go and talk to their mates. They've got those relationships, or go and talk to some significant other person in their life. For some people, it's a group, like a group of strangers, like the ones we host. It might be something like journaling. It might be going and working with a coach. It might be working with a therapist. It's really different for each person. But I think the most important thing for me, and this kind of speaks to what we were saying about being 30 or whatever age and starting to ask those questions, is to not deny those questions. You can only deny those questions for so long. And at some point, the energy it takes to ignore those questions becomes greater than it is to actually confront those questions. And in expending all that energy on just ignoring those questions, that's where the suffering arises.
I like that. That's a really nice way of putting it. I've one of the first podcasts I did was with my friend from uni, because it's episode 1, and you got to find people where you can find them, I guess. But no, he was really good. But he said that there's 2 things he said. The first thing was he sought therapy, and it was his thing. And he said it's amazing what you can say to a stranger, and I think you've sort of emulated that with what you're saying there. And we also talked about why we don't have these conversations. And he said, there's nothing heavier than you going, mate, I need to have a talk, or I need to have a chat. It like almost brings the mood down instantly. But what I've found in my personal experience, you may be able to shed some light on this as well, is the fact that I'm talking about this when I sit in a room with my friends. It's almost given them the license to talk about it. So we don't have to say, can I have a chat? It's the fact that I have openly created this podcast and I'm openly talking about self-development, mental health, masculinity, and like unshamefully, essentially. It's also they get that freedom because they feel that I'm a safe person to do it to. So you're right. You've either got to have the right person or go and find them.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's, I mean, yeah, so much to say on this. We had a community call on Tuesday evening, and it was about mental health. And a big topic of the conversation was why do we find it so hard to talk about our mental health to our mates, to other men, and all sorts of things came up. But what was consistent for most of the guys on that call was that they do find it hard. They find it's difficult to have what you described, and someone goes, "Oh, this is going to be heavy." Why? What a tragedy. What a tragedy that we can't have these conversations with each other when we are all going through variations of the same thing, and yet we're kind of fearing opening that conversation. And one of the guys on the call said, well, he over the years has gotten very good and has friendships, very good at opening these conversations, has friendships where he can have these conversations quite easily. And he said whenever he's opened up one of these conversations, he's only ever been met with acceptance and a kind of relief from the other person. It's like, oh, thank fuck, he's talking about it. That means I can talk about it. And he said it's only ever brought me closer to people that I've started those conversations with. But it does take courage. Someone's got to go first. And I find it almost amusing that, and this was me, years ago. Men will do all sorts of difficult things. We'll climb mountains. We'll run marathons. We'll do triathlons. We'll do Ironmans. All sorts of crazy, really intense stuff. The thing we won't do is sit in a room and have a conversation with our mate about what's really going on, unless we've had like a lot to drink or something, or some other drugs.
Yeah, the booze is usually where it comes out, right? I love you circles. I like the poking around. But yeah, you're not wrong. It actually reminds me. I think it was just after COVID. Me and a group of my friends from uni. He was like, "We're going to do the Yorkshire Three Peaks." So it's not crazy. It's more of a walk than a high climb. And it's like 24 miles, or just shy of a marathon distance, I think. And we stayed in this guy's Airbnb, and he said, "Oh, the record for the Airbnb is these nurses, and they'd done it in, I think, like 11 and a half hours." And we woke up in the morning and we said, "All we're doing today is beating that time by an absolute mile, so that this random Airbnb host in Yorkshire thinks that we're amazing." So we just spent the whole day just powering around these three peaks as fast as physically possible, and not really. Well, yeah, we enjoyed the space and we put our bodies through hell, but there was no like open conversations about what was going on. And the funniest thing is, I look back on this is before my friend proposed to his now wife. He tried to have that conversation with me, and I remember it vividly. He was like asking me about my partner at the time, and then sort of mentioned marriage and kids, and I just was like, "What are you talking about? We're walking at this great speed." So yeah, it's amusing that you made that analogy of us doing crazy things to avoid.
Yeah. It's fascinating, and I've done the Yorkshire Three Peaks a couple of times, and I love it. It's a fantastic route. But I had a similar experience. Like the first time was about 16 years ago, and it's because I did it with my brother and a couple of mates because we were training for a trip to Kilimanjaro, and it was the same thing. We were just powering through it as quickly as we could. And what was interesting is when we got to Kilimanjaro, because it's at altitude. And it was an 11-day hike, the one that we did, 11-day trip to the summit. You have to go slow. You cannot go fast. And if you try to go fast, you exhaust yourself. And so I had the most amazing conversations with not just my brother and our mate, but also other people in the group, just by being forced to slow down.
Yeah, that's cool. That's a cool story. And well done for doing Kilimanjaro. I've not done that. I've not got any crazy friends anymore. They've all got kids. They're not allowed out. Yeah, so it's that's probably something that I want to touch on next. So you talking about your communities and then being online. Like, are you going to consider doing stuff outside and doing the meetups and those type of things? Because there's obviously a huge benefit from getting sort of men together in a space and not necessarily having those conversations, allowing those conversations to happen naturally, as you said, by just slowing yourself down or doing something a bit different.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, longer term, I'd love to do more work in person, but also outdoors in nature. Something I think there's something really powerful and curative and enchanting about taking a group of men or being in a group of men outdoors together. There's a couple of people I know doing that work in the UK, doing really amazing stuff. And some of it's just really simple stuff. You know, you go outdoors, you make a campfire, you go for a swim, you cook something together, you sit around the campfire and eat. It is the most basic but also phenomenally powerful thing to do as a group of men. There's an in-person event in Berlin, where I live, coming up in April. And then longer term, would like to do more in-person stuff because I think there is something special about coming together face-to-face in person.
Amazing. Yeah, I completely agree. And I guess let's go a little deeper. I think I really want to get into masculinity, femininity, perceived perception of it, and how you think that's going to shape and how that's going to change. Because I think we're clearly in a transition period. I think that's clear to see. So I'll give you my sort of take on it, and it's like this great rise of feminism, and it's allowed for equal opportunity and equal growth and all of these things, and it's fantastic. And it's been a powerful voice for women for quite a while. And as with anything in any movement, there's always going to be strands of extremism and sort of drag it the other way. And I feel that now that most things are equal, it's like we're fighting. I don't know. It's like we don't know what we're fighting for anymore. So we're going to go as extreme as possible on the extremes. And I think that for me is what's awakened a lot of men as well. And it's like, well, hang on, you've got everything now. So like, why are we talking about things that were 50, 100 years ago as if they're my problem? And I think that is where this change in masculinity and this like, well, what we're going to do is we're going to take masculinity and we're going to tell you what it is, because what you're doing is you're saying 100 years ago it was this and it's still this, but I don't think that's what it is today. So that's my view on sort of where it's at. What's your sort of stance on that sort of space?
On masculinity?
Well, I guess just sort of like, what is it? What is next for that? Because we've had feminism rise, and like where do you see masculinity, femininity, feminism, masculinity, and men sort of, what do you see next for them? What do you see as the driving force? I guess within society rather than individually.
Yeah. I kind of my personal perspective is I generally reject any attempts to define masculinity, and that's why we have the strapline, there are 4 billion ways to be a man, because I think with any social structure, social construct, firstly, progress is never smooth or kind of linear, or the progress is always messy, and secondly, the danger is always we replace one orthodoxy with another, and then we tell everyone, well, you now have to believe this new orthodoxy. And I see that a lot, and it eventually becomes counterproductive. And I think that is at least part of the reason that there is a backlash from some people. Now, whether that's justified or not is another question. But I think we should always be curious about why people are pushing back against something, rather than coming up with simple solutions or labeling people. So, for what do I think's next, or what do I think's needed, rather than what do I think's next, because it's impossible to say what's next.
Yeah.
What I think's needed is emancipation for men, for liberation, and I use those words quite deliberately. I think there's been several hundred years, even longer actually, of oppression of women, and that still is happening in all sorts of places around the world, and in all societies and cultures around the world. And there's also been and remains roles and ideas of masculinity that have imprisoned and enslaved men. And if we just look at suicide and mental health rates amongst men, it's well known now. 75% of suicides in the UK are male, and that figure is consistent across all OECD countries, pretty much all developed countries, certainly. 3 times more likely to be addicted, much less likely to access talking therapies. So we have to start to ask questions about that. And I think men have to start asking questions about that as well. Everyone has to start asking questions about what roles have men taken up unconsciously, and are those roles serving them? And how might they unshackle themselves and unfree themselves from that? And part of that is to come back to what we were talking about earlier, a topic that few people want to talk about, but money and the ideas of success and what success looks like. Has long been an idea that to be a successful man, you become the breadwinner, or you play the role of primary earner, and then you buy stuff. You buy a house, then you buy a bigger house, and then you buy a big car. And look at what that's done to us. It's simultaneously oppressed women and enslaved men. And I see men all around me killing themselves to fulfill that idea of success. So what's needed, in my opinion, is for men to start really asking questions about what am I actually doing here? What's my role here? And what role do I want to play? What game am I playing? What story am I telling myself about the game I'm playing?
Societal pressures are huge, right? I think it's social media, right? The huge rise of that is only magnified. Keeping up with the Joneses, right? It's obviously now keeping up with the Kardashians, literally watching and observing their innate amount of wealth, I guess, that is the epitome of social media, in my opinion. And it's really hard. And I don't have a problem with anyone wanting to make lots of money. Like, I actually have used this example loads of times because I find it really funny. And so does my brother now. So my brother came to me, and we're both entrepreneurial. So he has his own business, and I have my own business as well. And he said, this was when he was a little bit younger. He's a lot younger than me. He's like 7 years younger than me. So he's like late teens, early 20s. And he said, I want to earn £100,000 a year, Liz. I said, cool. What are you going to spend it on? And he looked at me as if to say, what the fuck are you on about? I just need to earn £100,000. I was like, well, have you worked it out? Because you might need more. You might need a lot more. Like, if you truly are that way driven. But don't just pick a number because someone's told you that is the epitome of success. Create your own number, create your own identity, create something. Don't just listen to some bloke on the internet who's told you that 6 figures is the way to be. So yeah.
Yeah, and what happens when he gets to that number? Then what?
Well, yeah, exactly. That's the next thing, right? What is that? There's so many hyper successful people that are like, now what? There's an even like crazy stat. This is like weirdly related to success in another field. So like a lot of like high level engineers, like space engineers and like theoretical physicists, will reach the pinnacle of their career, i.e., go through all those doctorates and crazy amount of degrees and end up working at NASA or in some other crazy lab, and then realize that the problem is so large that they can't solve it, and they all quit and go and become carpenters. Like, it's genuinely like a really common thing for like astrophysicists to just quit and just go and do something with their hands because it's more logical for them to get a reward out of it, which I find really interesting.
Yeah, I'd be curious to know typically what age they quit as well, because there might be a midlife thing in there about seeking meaning, which is a central part of the midlife journey. Is you start to realize all this other chasing success, all this stuff I've been after, isn't it. That's not what I'm here to do. What I'm looking for is meaning before I die, because there's that realization that is going to come one day.
Yeah. it's it's about having those conversations earlier, right, with yourself. Those self conversations, I think, is like, um, and there's a few people, right, that refer to your life as being part of chapters, and those goals and meanings and change, right? Like right now, I'm single. I don't have kids. My aspirations and visions of life are completely different to Lewis in 5 years because I'll be in a different position and I'll be thinking about different things.
Sorry, you cut out there, so I missed how you ended.
Yeah, I think there was a little bit of a delay. I just said that me in 5 years is different to me now, and I think my goal for this and what I'm trying to get is that constant questioning rather than it's not just a one time thing. It's not like, what do I want? Don't do it in your 40s, do it in your 20s, do it in your 30s, do it every year, do it every 6 months, do it as regularly as you feel you need to.
Yeah, I think for me that's a beautiful way to live. To be in um, this constant state of curiosity about yourself, about your experience, about what's going on around you, about the world, about other people. Because out of that, you're asking the most important questions. You know, questions like what do I really want, and how am I feeling right now? And the more we ask ourselves those questions and ask other people, the richer our lives will be.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the things that I really pride myself on this, weirdly. I don't know why it's occurred in my life. I've never really seeked to do it, but I always end up having conversations with older people, like anywhere from like just older than me all the way up to like 80s, 90s, and having like quite deep conversations. It just seems to naturally happen that these people will share what's happened in their life to date and not maybe regrets or what they've done and why they enjoyed it, and basically encouraged me to do similar things, which is rare, but it just seems to have happened to me quite a lot. Like I just naturally seem to have these conversations with older people, which is, I guess, maybe put me in a different position now in my 30s, late 20s, whereas most people would have been on a different trajectory, shall we say. But yeah, that's something I always encourage is like go and speak to someone who's older than you, because it was their first time doing this as well. It's still their first go at life as well, and it's really interesting to see what they have to say. And yeah, someone said that to me the other day. It's remember it's your parents' first go at life as well, which was really quite nice. It really like changed the whole ethos of asking them questions. It was more like, I'm going to tell them what's happening with me and see what they say, rather than like, what would you do here? Like, this is what's happening, and it's different. So yeah, that was a little ramble.
Nice.
Ginny, I would love to hear what your thoughts are and what your goals are for the future. What are you thinking next for yourself? Where are you at with those things?
Yeah, is well, I used to, part of my journey, part of my turning point, particularly when I started to work with a coach, was I was rigidly trying to plan everything and control everything in my life, and at the same time, I wasn't one of these people who had a 5-year plan, but everyone else seemed to have a 5-year plan, and I was like, "What the fuck? I don't understand." And I've come to realize I'm just not a 5-year plan sort of person. And actually, the decisions I make and the things I do are they're much better when I let go of trying to analyze and plan everything and actually pay attention to my intuition or what I feel like doing next. So I can't really tell you with any certainty what is next. I can only tell you some sort of general vague directions I'm heading in. You know, I hope to grow the community, the men's community we've got. I'll keep doing that work. I'll keep researching. um, there's a book that I'm half writing, and I need to intentionally and properly put some energy into that. And beyond that, I don't know. I don't know how this looks even in a year's time, let alone 10, 20 years' time. The only question I try to ask myself now is, am I enjoying this? Does this feel right to me right now? Does this feel like the thing I should be doing? And as long as the answer to that is yes, then I keep doing it, and I trust that it will all lead to something.
Amazing. I really like that answer because it's the complete opposite to the answer from the last guest. So it's really good, and it really reiterates what you say, which is there's 4 billion ways to be a man, right? And I think you've created such contrast on the podcast from just 2 episodes that thankfully, hopefully, the people that listened to the last one who were like, "Oh shit, I need my 5-year plan," have just listened to this. And I was going to ask you a question, and I'm going to ask it you because I think you can summarize it again because you did answer it, and it's what keeps you motivated then without these goals?
I suppose the thing that motivates me for myself is learning, is continuing to learn. And the thing that motivates my work, I suppose, is serving other people and helping them to make sense of themselves and make sense of the world, which I guess is my journey too.
Nice. And constant questioning.
Permanent curiosity. It's a state of trying to cultivate a state of wonder. It's a much richer way to live, I find.
Yeah, I like that curiosity. It killed the cat, but it makes the man, right?
Well, I've got a 9-month-old son, and seeing the world through his eyes and how new and magical everything is to him is. I think a lot of parents say it, but I'm experiencing firsthand just how rich life can be when you pay exquisite attention to things.
Yeah, yeah. The world through a kid's eye must be amazing. My sister's got a 2-year-old, and he's just like, whoa. It's like it's a kitchen cabinet, mate. It's not, but it's yeah. You're right. It's if you can. That's actually really funny because they say men don't grow up; the toys just get more expensive. But I think there's another side to that is really powerful, which is that curiosity and that childlike nature to thing, and that comes from just questioning, right, and going on a journey rather than boxing yourself off early. Which, yeah, that's you said, yeah. Go on. Sorry.
Can I just share a quick story? It's not my story; it's a story because it speaks to, I think, curiosity and wonder. There's a comedy producer, a well-known one called John Lloyd, who I think is in his 70s now, and he was phenomenally successful. Was involved in all sorts of the greatest British comedies. And by the time he was in his early 40s, he'd made a lot of money. He'd had a production company and sold it, and he'd made a lot of money, and he'd achieved all the things he wanted to achieve, like creatively and financially and all those sorts of things. So he ticked all those boxes. And he'd just exited some business he'd been involved in, and he found himself sitting on this bench, deeply, deeply, deeply depressed. He was deep in his sort of midlife crisis, depression. What the fuck's this all about? And he described looking at this pigeon. And he was sitting on this bench, and he said, "I was looking at this pigeon." He said, "I've got no fucking idea how a pigeon works. What is a pigeon? What is it doing here?" And it led to this realization that for all his success, he knew nothing about the world. He had no curiosity for the world. He had no wonder for the world, or not as much as he could have. And he's actually the guy who founded QI. So he went on to found QI, and that was one of the reasons he founded QI, because he was like, well, there's just so much wonder in the world, so let's get curious about it. And I found that really fascinating because, this is a guy who had achieved all the things that most people would want to achieve, but found himself completely empty. And what he found was wonder. Wonder was the thing that brought him joy.
Nice story. I've really enjoyed this conversation, Jindy, because it's really reignited the reason that I did this. That's why I've gone off on these little monologues. I feel like I've hijacked your podcast. I do apologize. It's been you've reawakened something inside me, which has been really nice. So I'm truly thankful for that because, yeah, some days you forget why you're doing what you're doing, and I think this podcast has really reopened me up. So yeah, I'm genuinely appreciative of your time today. Actually, thank you so much. Yeah, sorry, I'm absolutely the world's worst host right now. I'm just.
Well, thanks for having me on. I've really enjoyed it. Always nice to have these conversations, and I love what you're doing. We need more of these conversations, so thank you.
Yeah, definitely. I will. I've got my host's hat. I've got my host hat back on. Jindy, thank you so much for your time. It's genuinely been an absolute pleasure. I'll leave you with the final words, and please tell people where they can find you and where they can join certain aspects of what you're doing, because also what you're doing is amazing. And you're right; these sort of conversations need to happen more regularly.
Thanks, Lewis. So the website for our men's work is leaderbrotherson.com. So leaderbrotherson.com. We've got a newsletter as well on Substack. On the website, you can find details of our community, or you can join one of our free groups. And my coaching practice is selfishleader.com. The only social media I use is on LinkedIn. You can find me, Jindy Mann, Mann. That's all the places to find me. Thanks for having me on, Lewis. Really enjoyed it.
Amazing. Thank you once again for your time, Jindy.